Hi everyone, Stepan here. I'm going to continue the Petrov defense series with the ideal drawing weapon for white, which is sad to say, but the Cozio Attack or the Lasker Attack, even though it has attack in its name, should be called the Cozio draw. Especially on the highest level, about 90% of the games end in a draw, so if you are looking for a peaceful way to tame the Petrov, then this is the variation for you. I have to say I'm irritated to cover it even, and I really don't like it because it forces an exchange of queens early on in the game, but still it has to be mentioned and it has been played by several strong players. One very exciting game which I would point out is Kramnik from the Candidates 2018. You can find it on my channel, and it's probably the most exciting game ever played in that variation. But the majority of other games end in a draw. So let's see the variation. e4, e5, knight f3, knight to f6, the Petrov defense or the Russian defense. Knight takes e5, white's most principled move, d6 chasing the knight away, the only move. By the way, if you haven't seen the introductory video on the Petrov, please do, to make sure you understand the moves such as knight takes e4 and why they don't really work. So d6, knight f3, knight takes e4, black takes back the pawn, and now white doesn't go for the classical, doesn't go for the Nimzovich, which we have covered in the last two videos. White goes for the move queen to e2, which is the Cozio Attack or the Lasker Attack. And even though this move might seem aggressive, attacking the knight in the most direct fashion, it really doesn't give white that many attacking chances, and we are going to see why. First of all, black has only one move, queen to e7. Defending the knight in any way, either with the bishop or one of the pawns, would be met by d3, winning the knight because the knight is pinned to the king. So black has to unpin and defend at the same time. Moving the knight is illegal, of course. So queen to e7, defending the knight and unpinning the knight. White now has only one good move, that's d3, chasing the knight away. Any other move would be met by d5, defending the knight, and then you would have the knight stuck in the center with your queen misplaced on e2, which means that your bishop is blocked. I have been looking at some variations with d4, d5, g3 and trying to put the bishop on g2, but this knight is just too annoying, and if you go for the variation with g3, bishop g2, then it's really hard to remove the knight without playing f3, and you are either going to have doubled pawns here, or you are going to have to capture the knight with your knight, which means that the d5 pawn is going to come to e4, misplacing your f3 knight. So after queen to e2, queen to e7, there really is only one option, and that's d3. Now, black has tried knight to c5, but the knight isn't really that good on c5, so the only move for black is knight to f6, returning the knight back to safety. And now white has a choice. White can either play bishop g5, knight c3, or take the queen immediately. In any case, unless black plays bishop e6 for some reason, which isn't really a good move because his f8 bishop is blocked, same as the f1 bishop, the queens are going to get traded off. So now let's look at some of the variations. Even though bishop g5 is the main move, knight to c3 is preferred by the strongest players, and it has been played by Magnus Carlsen, Wesley So, Pentala Hare Krishna, Hikaru Nakamura and others. So knight to c3 seems to be the most popular option. So we are going to look at that first. After knight to c3, black should exchange the queens off to make sure he is able to develop normally. So queen takes e2, bishop takes e2, and here you have the beginning of the Cozio Attack with the queens traded off. And you have the queens of the board, you have a symmetrical pawn structure, and of course on my level, low levels, anything can happen. I mean, nothing is clear here. But on the highest level, and even on grandmaster levels, normal grandmaster levels, this should be a draw, because what can you do to create an imbalance? It's really hard. Usually games are won or lost because imbalances are created, and here the only imbalance you could try to create is to play knight to e4 and allow black to capture and try to make the pawn structure at least asymmetrical with your pawn on e4. But that really shouldn't be enough, because it's really hard to create a pawn majority on any side of the board, and it's really hard to checkmate without the queen zone, especially with such development on the board, with each side still having to castle. So bishop takes e2. Now there are two moves. Bishop e7 is the main move, after which castles is played, and it's hard really to point out any attacking plans for either side. I'm really struggling to find any attacking ideas here. In my opinion, what white should do is play either bishop f4 or bishop g5, get his rook to e1, get his other rook to d1, try to get some chances that way. Perhaps the best idea would be to double the rooks on the e file, which is really hard to do with the bishop stuck on e2. So not much going on. The other move, which has been played by Fabiano Caruana, there have only been 9 strong games with this move, but most of them are by Fabiano, is the move g6, which at least tries to create an imbalance this way without putting the bishop on e7, where it doesn't have that much scope. With g6 you are hoping to put the bishop on a much more active diagonal and at least cause some problems for white on the queen side. So now bishop to g5 is the move. Bishop g7, castles long by white to create some imbalances, and castles short by black. And this is what I would say the most promising variation for both sides, and here you have the most chances in the variation. White can look forward to some ideas of taking the f6 knight and playing h4, h5. This is, I believe, a sensible plan for an attack. On the other hand, if you leave the e file, then black could take the e file, so it might not be as good. But I have been looking at some positions with king d2, rook d2, e1, h4, h5, taking the knight and trying to open up the position. But it's not really clear that white has anything. Here I would like to look at one game played between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana, which featured a similar variation. So after bishop to e2, Fabiano Caruana did play g6. You can see the evaluation on the right side of the board, so you can see that I'm telling the truth regarding the equality of the variation. In this position, knight to d4 was played instead of bishop to g5, and a6 was played, stopping either knight from coming to b5, which is okay because knight b5 was a threat. Now on the previous move, knight b5 knight b5 would have to be met by knight a6, but that's a common move anyway. I believe that king to d8 would also be fine. I was looking at this position and I think king d8 is also okay, but perhaps more sensible is knight to a6, because there's no way to remove the knight unless you move the b5 knight. But after knight to d4, Fabiano did choose a6, stopping knight b5. Bishop f4 was played instead of bishop g5, and black already has a slight edge, because the knight on d4 and the bishop on f4 are slightly awkward. Bishop g7, h3, stopping knight g4, bishop g4, and any ideas like that, basically restraining the pieces. And there's one thing about this variation which can be instructive. You are playing with the minor pieces for the biggest part of the middle game and the late opening, and usually whichever side has more space will be better with a lot of minor pieces on the board. So the main idea in the opening is to restrain the minor pieces, and as you can see, the last couple of moves have been doing exactly that. a6 restrains the knights, h3 restrains the knights and the knight and the bishop. So both sides are basically trying to reduce the scope of their opponent's pieces. So that's a very important thing to do. Sometimes even instead of developing, this might be a better idea. Okay, bishop to d7 was played, developing the bishop. Bishop to f3, putting the bishop on the long diagonal. Knight to c6, the reason why bishop here was played. And now Magnus Carlsen gets to double Caruana's pawns, but knight c6, bishop c6, bishop c6, bc6. Still an imbalance created, but you could argue that black profited slightly more from this trade, because he now has the semi-open b file. And with the move rook to b8, let's say if b3 was played, then all of a sudden knight h5 is a very scary variation. The bishop would have to retreat and stuff like that. So it's not as if Fabiano Caruana accepted to be worse. I think that he got enough compensation for these doubled pawns. And still, the c6 pawn cannot be attacked easily by the knight. and there's no light squared bishop to attack it, so these pawns aren't really targets. Castle's queenside was played by Magnus Carlsen, which is a very sensible move, simply defending the b2 pawn, and black doesn't have nearly enough firepower to cause any issues on b2 now. Fabiano chose king to d7 here, which is probably the best move. Castles would bring the king to g8, which doesn't make much sense. Rook h to e1, rook h to e8, knight to e4, as I said, trying to create an imbalance here. Knight d5, bishop d2, f5, chasing the knight away, knight to g5, h6, chasing the knight away, knight to f3. As I said, reducing the scope of the pieces, expanding when it's safe to expand and when it's a multi-purpose move. So Fabiano Caruana with this maneuver f5, h6 took away some squares from the knight and expanded on the king side, which could come in handy. The only downside is that the h6 pawn is now weak because the bishop is stuck defending it, and if it moves, the knight is going to have the g5 square. So now, to stop both of these ideas, g5 was played, which is once again the best move. Defending h6, stopping knight g5 forever, relieving this bishop of its duty. c3, reducing the scope of the knight, making the bishop able to move, and defending the b2 pawn. c5, trying to undermine this structure. King to c2, defending. Bishop f6. Rook takes e8, rook takes e8, rook to e1, rook to f8, declining a trade. Rook h1, rook e8, g3, g4, knight g1, bishop g5, a trade offered, king d1, a5, knight e2, and not really much going on. I mean, this variation is playable, and as you can see, Fabiano Caruana strived for an imbalance with the move g6, bishop g7, and he got some imbalances, and he even accepted double pawns on the c-file, but this is not nearly enough for strong grandmasters to get a win. There aren't enough weaknesses, and there aren't enough attacking chances. The game ended in a draw in about 10 moves. Okay, so I wanted to show you that game. So the move g6 is definitely interesting, and after bishop to g7 here, Magnus decided not to castle, which is the main move. He played the move knight to d4, which creates a threat. As I said, knight to b5 could also be a threat. But castling makes perfect sense. And after castles, as I said, I like white's chances more than in the other lines. After knight c3, queen takes e2, bishop takes e2. If black goes bishop e7, castles, then there really isn't that much going on in the position. Okay, let's go back to the opening. Knight f3, knight takes e4, queen e2, queen e7, d3, knight f6. Let's look at the other two moves. The other option white could go for is that white exchanges the queens. Bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, bishop takes e7, and at least this move doesn't allow black to go for the variation g6, bishop g7, which might be a good idea. But you gave black the chance to develop his bishop instead of you developing your own with tempo after you take the queen. So now after knight to c3, once again, the position is equal. Bishop g5 could be played later on. Let's say black castles, bishop g5, castles queenside at some point. You could strive for imbalances, and that's the best idea here, but as I said, not much going on. So let's look at the main move now. Knight f6, bishop g5 is the main move. Pinning the knight to the queen. And now to unpin, black has only one good move, and that's to take the queen. If you don't, then white is simply going to capture the knight, and you are going to have to recapture with the pawn. And let's say black plays something stupid, knight c6, then takes the queen. Takes the knight. The queen is pinned to the king, so you cannot take. You have to take with the pawn, and whatever happens now, you are going to have two targets to exploit. Especially if this bishop gets traded off, then a maneuver like knight h4, knight f5 would be really strong, and white would actually be better in that variation. So after bishop to g5, black should take the queens off, queen takes e2, bishop takes e2, bishop to e7. As I said, it's really hard even in this variation to play g6 because the knight would be hanging. So both the main variation with bishop g5 and the direct capture of the queen on e7 makes g6, bishop g7 impossible, which is a good thing because you reduce the number of options black has. Knight c3, c6, depriving the knight of the key squares in the center, d5 and b5. castles queenside, knight a6, the knight is coming into c5 or into c7, rook h2 e1, knight c7, knight e4, knight takes c4, d takes c4. This is the biggest imbalance you could hope to create. Bishop takes g5, knight takes g5, king to e7 is the main move. And here I would say that white stands slightly better. White did manage to get something out of the opening. He has a definite lead in development, so all of the white pieces have been developed, the rooks have been connected, and black is yet to develop his bishop and to connect the rooks. So white is definitely better theoretically here, but practically speaking, is there any chances? Of course there is. Your opponent could always make a mistake, but with good play, it's just a draw. From this position on, there have been, let me count, 3, 35, 40, about 45 games played, and 95% of the games ended in a draw. So yeah, not much to say about this variation. So let's return to the opening. e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, knight e5, d6, knight f3, knight e4, queen e2. Remember for black that you have to play queen to e7, otherwise you lose the knight. d3 chasing the knight away, d4 and stuff like that doesn't really work because you're stuck with the knight on e4, d3, knight f6. Now you could either go for knight c3, Magnus Carlsen's choice, bishop g5, which is the main line, or queen takes c7. I think that bishop g5 is the best attempt because knight c3 allows the variation with g6, bishop g7. Not that there's much in it for black, but still you should reduce the options. So bishop g5, black should now take because otherwise he's going to end up with doubled f-pawns. Queen takes c2, bishop takes c2, bishop e7. Your knight always goes to c3 because you want to castle queenside. c6 castles, and yeah, this is the starting position of the opening. One theme that should be remembered is knight to e4 and putting your pawn on e4. After that you might try playing f3, moving your other knight, getting your knight into d4, trying to create some chances like that. But as I said, not much going on. So if you are looking for a perfect way to tame the Petrov defense, then the Cozio draw is should be your weapon of choice. Play queen to e2. You are certain that you are going to trade the queens off, get a symmetrical position in which neither side has too many attacking chances. So if you are playing a much higher rated opponent, then this might be the move to make. If you are playing a much lower rated opponent, this might be the move to make, because in my experience lower rated players don't know how to deal with slow positions, and they always want to attack and do something. So it might be an interesting weapon. If Magnus Carlsen played it, Hikaru Nakamura played it, Hare Krishna played it, Kramnik played it, Wesley So played it, then it must be a good variation, but still I think it's likely to end in a draw. So in my opinion, the previous video, the Nimzovich attack, should be your weapon of choice if you want to win. Okay, thank you very much for watching. Thanks very much for the support and the kind comments. Please let me know what you think about this drawing weapon for white. Let me know if you have played it successfully and won, and I want to know how. I really do. Thanks very much. Stay tuned for more chess. See you later. Bye bye.